And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Thursday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So today marks 38 years. Hard to believe. No, not the movie Airplane. That's my shirt. Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue. But today marks 38 years since the release of a significant box office hit and somewhat of an artistic triumph for actor, producer, director Clint Eastwood, as December 5th, 1986 saw the release of his somewhat based on true events as far as the historical perspective, but he's playing a fictional character, Heartbreak Ridge. And Clint, this is the only movie that he made while serving one term as mayor of his adopted hometown of Carmel, California. Now, Clint Eastwood is somebody that over time has had his moments in the political arena, making comments. The 2012 RNC had a lot of laughs. But he is not somebody that after serving the one term as mayor of Carmel, California, he'd had enough. He'd had enough of the kind of politics where you're actually doing something and working on maybe changing some laws and regulations and getting rid of stupid rules and regulations. That's why he ran for mayor of Carmel in the first place. There were some local ordinances that were positively demented. And so he ran as, and they actually advertised this, he ran as a nonpartisan. He wasn't looking to be, in this instance, Republican philosophy, Democrat philosophy, independent philosophy. He just wanted to get rid of a couple of really stupid rules. Like you weren't allowed to sell ice cream. You weren't allowed to sell ice cream. Like there were no shops. They weren't allowed to sell ice cream in Carmel. What? Well, ice cream kind of is a little messy and it might spill on the sidewalks and in the streets. This is real? Yeah, that was real. And there was another ordinance that said that women walking through Carmel could only wear heels up to a certain height, which I think was 2 inches. Now, nobody was getting arrested, but the fact that somebody put those rules on the books was enough to aggravate the then 53, 54-year-old Clint Eastwood. We said, all right, you know what? Let me run for mayor. We'll see what happens. So he became mayor. And as he put it, when he was in the office, which was more than you would think, it was 2 years of chicken salads. That's how he describes it. It was 2 years of eating chicken salad for lunch. Not that great. But the specific story, and this is true, this is so stupid, but it's what you would imagine of why he became so fed up with politics. Because we're just talking local. And he said, if local is this ridiculous and this bad, just imagine state, just imagine federal. Because there were people in the 80s, oh, Clint should run for president. Yeah, no thank you, I'm all set here. So Clint, his primary, the most important story as to why he didn't go further in politics. He was in the office of mayor, and there's pictures of him at council meetings, town, where they were discussing various local issues, and he's smiling, and he has the little logo in front of him that says Mayor Eastwood. It's all very official because it was completely above board and very official. And he was very popular, I should point out. He got broad support because he wasn't looking to make any enemies. He was just looking to get rid of fucking bullshit rules that they had in Carmel. I don't even know who put them in place or what groups. No clue. But most of the people in that town, quite well off. So one day, Clint received a complaint from a neighbor. The neighbor was complaining about another neighbor who was building a deck. The neighbor A said, it's too high. What he's talking about is too high. It's not code. Clint basically said, you gotta be fucking kidding me. What do you want me to do? I'm just the mayor. He says, well, Mr. Eastwood, Mayor Eastwood, we're going to need you to go to neighbor B's house and measure the deck. And it's up to you to determine whether or not it in fact is code. So on a random Friday night, sometime, I don't know if it was early 1986, but it was in that ballpark, there's Clint Eastwood trying to mediate a dispute between two of his neighbors, both of whom are pretty well off. And he's on a stepladder with a measuring tape in his hand, trying to figure out whether neighbor B's proposed deck was going to be code. And it was while he was on that ladder that he knew that his career in politics had already come to a conclusion. So the one movie that he made while serving his term was Heartbreak Ridge. And they were able to shoot it very close to his office. So, I mean, it's almost absurd. There are days where he's in full character, costume, wearing the military fatigues, whatever it might be. His character is a Marine in the world of the film. But he was able to move back and forth. And there are no pictures of him in his, military garb from the movie at his office. I'm sure there must have been a couple of days where he had to race back to the office while he was still wearing his combat boots. But I haven't seen them. If those exist, maybe somebody buried them. But Heartbreak Ridge was a movie that got pretty good reviews, and it was nominated for a couple of technical Oscars, and it was up for Best Sound. I feel like there was another one. And it is a film that is very well remembered by history, but it was the last box office hit of the kind of first iteration Clint Eastwood, when he was the biggest star in Hollywood, one of the biggest stars going back to the late 1960s. And then he kind of went downhill. His follow-up film that he starred in, the Fifth Dirty Harry film, The Deadpool, didn't quite make it at the box office. It didn't do as well as it should have. It's a pretty good movie. Another one of those movies with soon-to-be huge stars in supporting roles in Jim Carrey and Liam Neeson. Even Patricia Clarkson, who ended up has had a huge career, is in supporting role there. But Heartbreak Ridge, there is such an incredible irony that here we are 38 years later. Now think about this. Clint Eastwood's character in Heartbreak Ridge, he is essentially like the greatest soldier the United States has ever had. That's how he's presented. He has won medal after medal, honorariums for valor over and over, whether it was Korea, whether it was Vietnam. This is somebody, his character of Tom Highway, who repeatedly walked into the lion's den and came out alive, and in many cases rescued people who would have been dead otherwise. He is an extraordinary soldier. The rest of his life, he's not good at it. He's horrendous. And unfortunately, he's a borderline alcoholic. He ruined his marriage, presumably because he was messing around on his wife, played by, Clint's so good with casting, Marsha Mason, a four-time Oscar nominee herself. She takes what could easily be a thankless role here and makes it memorable because she's such a talented performer. And they really look good together. And again, Clint having an age-appropriate love interest here. This was not a coincidence. I think his character is actually supposed to be older. I think Clint is playing more like 60, and he was 50. I think he was 55 during filming. But his character is a wreck. He is a wreck of a man. And he's coming to the end of the line as a Marine. He is reaching what is known as mandatory retirement age. And now, 38 years later, the real guy who played Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway, who was coming up against mandatory retirement age in 1986, Clint Eastwood Jr., was gently, seemingly pushed out of the movie business, or at least the attempt of Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav, who then kind of had to backpedal and say, I kind of fucked up here. I shouldn't ever have gone after Clint. It wasn't his fault that Cry Macho didn't work. It's the fault of the executives that forwarded the project. There's nothing wrong with that film. The story just wasn't interesting enough. We shouldn't have done it in the first place. That's a whole other problem. But here's Clint. 38 years later, he just completed and released, and again, Zaslav, nobody knows what the fuck the guy was doing. It didn't get a full release in theaters, but it is going to be nominated for a lot of Oscars. It's sitting at 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, the film starring Nicholas Hoult, and Toni Collette and Kiefer Sutherland, among others. J.K. Simmons is in it too. Juror number 2. It's going to hit HBO Max, or what's now known as Max, in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to watch it. But think about how many years, how long a span of time is 38 years. And Clint's playing a character who is being forced to retire. And 38 years later, 94-year-old Clint Eastwood Jr. turns out a movie with a 93% Rotten Tomatoes score, and scores of critics saying, we wish Hollywood made more movies like this. God bless the continued energy and skill of Clint Eastwood, that he continues to be able to do it. And the assumption is that this is his last film, but who the fuck knows? His mother made it past 100. And he even joked about Sidney Lumet. Sidney Lumet did Find Me Guilty. He was certainly well into his 80s, the one with Vin Diesel from, 2004? But Heartbreak Ridge is one of Clint's best performances because he gives you all sides of this character of Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway, this extraordinary soldier and legitimate tough guy. He's not pretending to be a badass. He's not putting on airs and just acting tough. He is tough. He is put forth as a guy that can beat the shit out of the next 9,999 men that you put in front of him. And not only can he beat the shit out of him, the fight's usually over in 15 seconds. It's like Steven Seagal in all of those movies during his kind of salad days where he never really got into a fight. He makes one move, fight's over. He goes like this, breaks a guy's arm. He goes like that, breaks a guy's nose, fight's over. Well, Clint doesn't do exactly that, but we see him in enough confrontations where nobody can even stand with this guy. He has so many different kinds of fighting skills, and he acts like he doesn't give a shit. Go ahead. It's almost like the Mike Starr character, speaking of Seagal and On Deadly Ground. Why don't you just take your best shot, pal? Take your best shot. Ain't going nowhere. So Tom Highway started his military career with a specific platoon, specific to the Marines, the reconnaissance platoon, called Recon for short. And as we meet him, the people that he comes into contact with in the barracks where they are in the Marines, I think they're somewhere in, I don't think it's Fort Jackson, but it's somewhere in North Carolina. Fort Jackson is South Carolina. My dad was at Fort Jackson, but he wasn't Marines. My dad was Army. But the people he comes into contact with, there are young people who have not met him but know him by reputation, who treat him with respect. And then there is a commanding officer that basically talks down to him and wants to run him out of the Army because, listen, we all know what you can do in wartime, but we're not at war right now. I don't want you in my corps. I just don't want you here. And if there's any way, he kind of says, if there's any way for me to run you out of here legally, I'm going to do it. And I'm not apologizing. I just don't want you here. So he's dealing with the kind of hostile commanding officer played very well by Everett McGill in this film. And he's kind of a genre favorite. He was in Stephen King's Silver Bullet, among others. A very distinctive, interesting actor with a good face for the movies and a very kind of caustic line delivery. He used to great effect in License to Kill, the second of the two fantastic Timothy Dalton Bond films. Really, really terrific actor. But Highway meets the recon platoon who he is in charge of. And you have, again, some very interesting actors of the day, led by Mario Van Peebles, a great actor who turned into a terrific filmmaker himself. New Jack City, he directed that. It's one of the better movies of the first part of the decade of the 90s, which, as I always say, the single greatest decade Hollywood ever had. And you have other actors like Tom Villard, who unfortunately passed. And Mario Van Peebles plays an entirely unconventional character called Stitch Jones, who is a musician who kind of fancies himself as a soldier, but he's a phenomenal athlete. Mario, being very young, has the great build and the athletic look to him. Highway's job is to turn these kind of slackers into soldiers. And he does it in a way that is more believable, dare I say, than, and this is not a criticism of Full Metal Jacket, but the gunnery sergeant in that film, Hartman, there is no mercy with him. There is no sense of a progression in how he deals with the soldiers. He is simply an unrelenting piece of crap towards the soldiers because he feels like it's the only way to turn them into the inhuman killing machines that they must be in his estimation. He's not just doing it to be a troll. He's under the impression they have to be this way. I have to be brutal. I have to be as hard as possible with these young men. They're all going to die out there. They might all die anyway, but I give them the best possible chance by turning them into hard-hearted killers. Well, Gunnery Sergeant Highway has certain parallels where he spends a significant chunk of the film in really bruising, and he's more entertaining. And this movie was earlier than Full Metal Jacket, and this is not Vietnam era, but Highway was a Vietnam era superstar Marine. But he starts off with the tough love approach where he appears to be merciless. He appears to be fucking with the soldiers just because he can. but there is a logic. There is a method to his madness. And once the soldiers stop trying to get out of various details and various bits of legitimately hard work that they don't know, is this really because it's kind of part of the training, or is this guy just an asshole? And we know, because it's Clint, there is going to be more to the character than simply beating the young soldiers over the head and let's just see what happens. As they respond to his methods, his tough love approach, they turn into an elite force. And it's believable how the movie shows this, even though the Marines in real life took issue. They said, well, he fired live rounds. There's a famous moment in the scene where he fires an AK-47 in the direction of his men. And they pointed out, yes, it's a movie, and Clint, we love him. Any gunnery sergeant who did this in real life, he's gone. He's complete. He's goodbye. See ya. That wouldn't pass. Now, somebody would have to report it. And in a world of the movie, his own men, we don't know what you're talking about. He didn't fire live rounds. They have his back because they perceive that he has theirs and will have theirs. And so as the soldiers start to rise, there are things that Clint does in this movie, or I should say doesn't do. There are a couple of characters that we expect Clint to have, well, it wouldn't be much of a fight. We expect him to beat the shit out of a couple of kind of antagonistic characters within the world of the film. And the movie doesn't go there. And it's almost as if 55 at the time, going on 56-year-old Clint Eastwood was showing a little bit of a different kind of maturity, that he didn't want to just make this movie fan service, showing Clint being this incredible tough guy and just kicking the shit out of every single person who crosses him. There is a reason, there is a logic for the fights that we see. And the characters that we think are going to get into it, well, it's not really important to the story. There are other ways. There's more than one way to skin a cat. There is more than one way to get your point across that this character is wrong. We don't have to kick the shit out of him to show that he's wrong. We simply need to prove, maybe we need to prove to other high-ranking military that I know what I'm doing, and I think that he might be a little bit out of his depth here, with all due respect. Maybe he should be reassigned. And there was a similar component on the Band of Brothers, the HBO series, which was so good, Band of Brothers, where the David Schwimmer character shouldn't have been leading the Easy Company. That was not where he had the most use. He was a shitty commanding officer. And there are some people that have, unfortunately, we see this in life, it's just the way it goes. You get promoted to a level, you get promoted enough, and you no longer can do the job that you were able to do one notch below, and now it's just a little too much for you. You have the wrong take. You have the wrong handle on how best to go about this. And what this movie shows very clearly is that Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway is a great soldier. He may be a mess in his personal life, but he actually does give a shit. He cares about the young men under his charge, and he's going to train them to the best of his ability. And this movie argues that he knows what he's doing because he turned a bunch of slackers into fantastic soldiers. Now, the film climaxes with a real-life historical event, which was the United States Marines' incursion into Grenada, which I want to say took place in 1982, but it could have been 83. But I actually have a friend who took part in this, and he says, yes, the glitz and Hollywood and Clint and all of that, but the film gets a lot of things right with the kind of chaos that ensued when the Marines got over there. And there were a lot of moments that were scary. It's always scary in combat, but it wasn't a straight up fight. You didn't exactly know where the enemy was going to be, if they were anywhere. And that, doubts start creeping in. People start panicking. And in the world of the movie, the soldiers are strong. They rise to the occasion, and it doesn't feel like a narrative cheat. It feels believable that, yeah, this is probably how they would behave. There is chaos, but there is calm within the chaos. And the character that Mario plays of Stitch Jones, there is just this unbelievable moment where they're pinned down and they basically have this old school phone and they make a call, and it's like a collect call. This is the United States Marines, and where they called from, they need some kind of proof. They need to be able to pay whatever it is. And Mario Van Peebles somehow has a credit card, and they're able to put the call through. And it turns out to be a pretty important moment in the story. And there is an arc to Tom Highway within the world of the story. He has a better idea of what the rest of his life is going to be. Whereas when we meet him, all he knows is they're throwing him out of the Corps. What's with this mandatory? This is bullshit. This shouldn't be the case. Hey, it is. You just got to deal with it. And his performance, I feel, sharpens as the film goes forth, as does Mario Van Peebles, who is a riot in the first act. And then as the story goes, the character of Stitch continues to kind of grow and change and show his chops as a soldier and somebody who may actually end up making the military his career. Maybe he's not cut out to be a musician. He's actually a pretty good musician from what we see, but he's a little bit of an Andy Kaufman, Tony Clifton, where part of his shtick is insulting the audience and getting into it. It's not really good for a long-term career to have people wanting to beat the crap out of you every time you perform. Heartbreak Ridge was a substantial box office hit. In 2024 dollars, it probably would have made about 300 million. I think the official gross in the US alone was 122 million. It has been on, I know it's been on Max. I'm not sure if it's on Max now. It's been on Tubi. It's been free with Amazon Prime. I don't think that it's been on Netflix, but it is a movie that is absolutely worth seeking out. It's another movie that if someone, let's say a young person who knows the name of Clint Eastwood, but isn't familiar with his work, or maybe they've just seen Gran Torino, for example, because a father, brother, older cousin may have turned them onto it, but they're not familiar with Clint's work. This is one of those movies that I recommend they check out, along with In the Line of Fire, Absolute Power, and I would say Escape from Alcatraz. Movies that the average young person who just knows the name and is curious, well, how did this guy become a big actor, big director? Heartbreak Ridge is a good primer on the really extraordinary screen presence of Clint Eastwood and how he's able to take this very flawed character and make him almost lovable by the end of the film. It's not something that happens in a vacuum. It's a terrifically directed movie and a really strong lead performance by Clint as Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway. It's one of his most iconic characters for sure. Heartbreak Ridge, released on this day, 1986, produced by, directed by, starring Clint Eastwood, Mario Van Peebles, Marsha Mason, and a really fire Mario Van Peebles. This has been episode 375 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.